I just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. Good to have you here on this Monday, and we're going to start the week. We're going to start it just on fire here because we're going to talk about a really tough topic today. I think if you look at the church, hi Judy, good to have you here, by the way. If you look at the church and the issues that we deal with, the church has had a real hard time dealing with the issue of sexuality in general, and now with the all the letters and the pluses and the things we don't understand that don't make sense to us because we have a scriptural viewpoint. We don't know how to handle this well, and so we're going to talk about how do we properly approach a really hot issue of LGBTQ and the plus, what all that means. How do we maintain truth? How do we live in grace? How do we reach people? How do we love people properly? Because we know we should. And if you're honest about the church, we haven't always. And a lot of it, I think, is just not knowing how to deal with it. So I have someone who hasn't just decided to talk about this topic, and he's written on it. In fact, he's been on Life Today before. His name is Caleb Kaltenbach. He's been on Life Today previously, and this was the book we talked about previously. It's called Messy Grace, and really a great book. Tells his story, and would certainly recommend it. But he's got a new book that just dropped, and it's called Messy Truth. And so we got a really messy guest today, but I'm really excited to have him. I've had some great conversations with him, and frankly, he's really helped me to understand how to better share the love of Christ with people, no matter what their position or background or experience. And that's the most healthy thing of all. So Caleb, great to have you back on Life Today, this time on Life Today Live.
Hey, man, it's so good to see you. And I think the last time we saw each other was at Prestonwood a few years ago. But really enjoy your show and your ministry, Randy. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, I'm really honored to because you have been in ministry and you have really helped not just people that need ministry, but you've helped ministers that need to know how to minister better. But for those who don't know your story, let's give them the little bit of a background just so they know where you're coming from, because you speak with a perspective that not only brings experience, but I think a level of authority.
Yeah. My parents were both professors at the University of Missouri-Columbia. They taught at other colleges in Columbia, Missouri. And when I was 2, they divorced and they both went into same-sex relationships. My dad never had a monogamous partner. He had several different friends, but my mom was in a 22-year relationship with a woman named Bira. They moved to Kansas City, Missouri, home of the greatest football team ever to walk the face of the earth, the greatest quarterback. And maybe that's a whole nother episode we need to do, Randy. Mm-hmm. But they got involved in activist events when I was growing up, preschool, elementary age, middle school. They joined the board of directors for GLAAD in the Kansas City area. They took me with them to bars and camps and house parties and campouts and pride parades and you name it, I was there. And really, honestly, there's a lot I can say about that. But unfortunately, I just got such a negative impression about Jesus in my mind because I saw some people who profess to be Christians holding up signs saying God hates you, even spraying water and urine on the parade. And I thought to myself, man, if Christians are this bad, I can't imagine how awful Jesus is. And so I never wanted to be a Christian. And when I was 16, I joined a Bible study to learn how to attack the Bible. And instead, that was a great plan. I'm now a pastor, right? Didn't work out that well. And I ended up becoming, a Christian and changed my view of sexuality to the historic Judeo-Christian view that you and I both hold. And then I had to come out to my 3 activist gay parents as a Christian, and they ended up kicking me out. So that same fear and oppression many LGBTQ students have experienced or have said to have experienced from their parents, I experienced from mine, showing that it's not just some random conservative Christian thing that people do. It's a thing that humans do because people react badly when they're led by fear, right, Randy? We don't do well with that. And so I eventually they let me back in. I went to Bible college. My parents actually was in LA at a church as associate pastor, where I'm a pastor right now, called Shepherd of the Hills Church, big church out in LA. I was in Dallas, Texas for 3.5 years. And while I was there, my mom and dad moved down there to be closer to our family. Then they started attending the church I was preaching at, even though they knew what I believed. And about 2 or 3 weeks before we moved back to Southern California, when people were still moving to California, my parents gave their lives to the Lord at the ages of 69 and 70. Huh. And so I not only function as one of the many pastors in my church, but I also help, besides writing, help churches and organizations really figure out how can we hold firm to our values and our doctrine, but at the same time, love LGBTQ individuals and help them to see Jesus and that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing and beautiful story. And I would encourage people, if you want to read the details of Caleb's story, pick up Messy Grace. But before we get into some of the issues, Caleb, that are more political, because I do want to talk about that, and really before we get some of the lessons that you are now teaching to pastors who are trying to deal with this, I want to know, what was it? What was the message that brought your parents to Christ? Because that to me is key in how we approach this whole issue.
Man, that's a great question. You know what? I asked them the same thing, and here's what they told me. They told me that people treated them like people, not like projects. In other words, there was a group of Christians who decided that they would look past the theological differences and the differences of opinion on relationships, and that they would love my parents as human beings, as individuals made in God's image and likeness, and people that Jesus died for. And that made all the difference, because when I asked them, I was expecting some kind of philosophical or apologetics type reasoning, because my parents are academics. That's just the way their mind works. And it was really individuals showing them that you can still disagree and love someone. That there's a difference between acceptance and agreement. That acceptance is loving people no matter what. Jesus says that we have to love people where they are. That doesn't mean that we have to agree with every relational decision somebody makes or approve of every political opinion somebody has. Praise God for that. Or we don't have to affirm every ethical decision that somebody makes. So you can always tell that you're dealing with an extremist in society when they see no difference between acceptance and agreement. It's just one and the same. And I really think what helped my parents, besides people viewing them as people, not by projects, is really a loving community coming around them and helping them to see Jesus, which is why I wrote the sequel, Messy Truth, right here, because Messy Grace deals all with your individual personal relationship with LGBTQ individuals. Messy Truth, on the other hand, really, really drives home the idea that people find and follow Jesus better in community, not in isolation.
Okay, now that's obviously one of the big points, and we can talk about that. But when the church tries to walk into this, there are two ditches on this road, and you've got them both in your two books. There's one on the grace side, there's one on the truth side, both of which are great. We are called to 100% grace and 100% truth as Jesus walked. But it seems like we get off into an area of, I'm just going to be so gracious that I'm going to accept this person and not call out the sin. Or on the other side, on the truth side, we get to the place of, I'm going to constantly remind this person that they are walking and living in sin, which, whether intentional or not, has the feeling of zero grace a lot of times. How in the world do we walk that balance?
Man, another good question. And I would say one of the ways that we should really try to walk that balance is not to try to walk the balance. I've gotten in trouble any time that I've tried to balance grace and truth, because I'm not good at it. I can hardly balance grace and truth with my own kids that I'm raising, my 14-year-old and 12-year-old. So I don't know how I'm going to balance it with other people. I don't even balance it with myself that well. We're either too gracious with ourselves, or we're either, too harsh on ourselves. And so I think that what we need to try to do is acknowledge the reality that people are living in, but at the same time, we always need to stand for what we believe in. We need to be uncomfortable. This is one of the reasons why in the latter half, the latter 1/3 of Messy Truth, I devote the last third of the book to how do you have difficult conversations without shaming people. Now, we all have to have truth conversations. Truth conversations do bring guilt. I mean, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. The Holy Spirit leverages those conversations to bring conviction. Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. And so that is true. But me and of myself, I should not, shame someone or that kind of a thing. And so, it's really how do you have truthful conversations with people without destroying them? Because there are a lot of well-intentioned people who have had truth conversations with LGBTQ individuals and insert any other type of person. Even the heterosexual couple that's living together. And they're right in their theological convictions and in what they said, but they're wrong in how they said it. They said it in a way where the person really couldn't hear them. They didn't meet them where they were at. It reminds me of 1 Corinthians 9:19 and following, when the Apostle Paul says, I've become all things to all people, meaning that he met people where they're at. And I think that's what we need to get better at doing. Without abandoning our values, because unfortunately, progressive Christianity really, really seems to be taking a foothold in our society right now.
Yeah, and again, we're going to talk about that. The scripture that says love covers a multitude of sin, I think a lot of times we misapply that, misinterpret it even, but I think this is where it applies, because when you look at the word that's used for sin, it's missing the mark, mistakes. It's not necessarily the intentional things. It's just I messed up there. And you know what? When you show love towards someone, it makes up for a lot of mistakes, especially the unintentional ones where we don't realize that, I could have said it better. Yeah. But when you know that I love you, there's a lot more leeway, My wife can say something to me that I would be offended if someone else said to me. But I know that she loves me, and so even if she didn't say it in the best way, I know where she's coming from. And I think that's what a lot of what you're saying. To reach the whatever you want to call it, community, I tend to call it the ABS community, anything but straight, because I can't keep up with all the things they add. But to reach anyone who is outside of the Orthodox Christian view of sexual relationships, they have to know we love them. And so you're right. We don't have to we don't ever want to compromise the truth, but we start with the love. I think is that what you're saying, or help me out
absolutely. Here? We have to start with love, because you look at Jesus. He shared the gospel one way with Nicodemus, in John 3, than he did with the woman at the well in John 4. In John 3, he starts with truth and he ends with grace. Why? Because he's dealing with a Pharisee who is all about legalism, who is an expert in the law, expert in the Old Testament. But then he meets the woman at the well in Samaria, and he starts with grace and ends with truth because of where she was at. He met them for where they're at. And I think part of this, and this is what I try to drive home in Messy Truth as well, is that we are fighting for influence in somebody's life. And not influence to have our own way, but influence for the glory of God. I look at my own kids. They're 12 and 14. They are in public schools. Thankfully, I live in a suburb of LA, so they're in Ventura County, and the public schools there are a bit better. But the fact of the matter is that my kids go to school every day. They watch TV, they read, they do their homework, and there are ideas that are fighting for influence in their lives. And my wife and I, we are fighting for influence in my kids' lives. I want to earn the right in the life of my kids and the life of my friends to be one of the first people that they call when their life hits the bottom of the barrel, because that's when people will be the most open to hearing about Jesus. I want them to fall in love with Jesus more than anything. And then let's have a conversation about holy living, because I would rather have people follow Jesus and obey him because they're devoted to him rather than feeling obligated, even though we are obligated. I want them to do it out of love. Like, for instance, I'm obligated to feed my kids. Contrary to what they may tell you sometimes, Randy, they have never gone without food. They've always been well nourished. But I don't feed my children because I'm afraid of somebody calling CPS. That desire comes because I love them and I want to take care of them. So love from devotion really, really inspires people more than just doing something because you feel like you have to.
Yeah, and I feel like we also have to have an established relationship really to speak deeply in a lot of people's lives. I found this with the race issue, It's like if I don't have a relationship with someone and we have a disagreement, there's not going to be a lot of real conversation and not a lot of ideas changed. But the people that I've got this long-standing relationship, we can have a good, even hard, uncomfortable conversation, and we know everything's all right because the love is there. So yeah. I see that.
Yeah. There's a relationship there. And really that influence comes from a relationship. It comes from trust, and it comes from making consistent relational investments in people's lives, and even relational spiritual investments in people's lives.
Yeah, so right. All right, we're talking to Caleb Kaltenbach, and this is his book. It is out just this month. It's just been out a couple weeks. It's called Messy Truth. And boy, if this is an issue that you're wanting to learn how to better deal with, here's your handbook right there. In fact, I'd go back and pick up Messy Grace and Messy Truth and read through both of them. It really, really help you. Here's one of the tough questions, and I know this may not be a big thing, but to me it kind of typifies sort of the place where a lot of Christians are, where we don't know what to do, and that is with the idea of pronouns. Right? I know this sounds trivial, but it really does exemplify where we're like, what the heck? What do we do here?
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're a man, obviously, but you're wearing women's clothing, so you want me to call you she, but I know you're a man. And to me, it feels like a little bit of caving to social or untruth, social pressure or untruth, to call you she when I know you're clearly a he, even if you're not that clearly a he. That may sound silly, but I know that a lot of people who are transgender get offended if we don't call them with the right pronoun.
Yeah.
Is that as big a deal as I think it is, or is this just trivial?
Well, I mean, I think it's a big deal to them. And, I think that the whole idea is a big deal to our society as a whole, combined. There are so many different aspects of what we could talk about this with.
Let me ask this the direct question then, because it sounds like, okay, you should have the grace and call that person a she, because that's the way the person wants to be called. Or you go on the other truth side and go, no, it's a he. I'm going to call him he. Do I go with grace or truth?
Yeah. I think here's, and this is going to sound like I'm selling out, and I'm really not. Trust me. I believe in biblical creation. I believe in what Jesus said in Matthew 19 when he quoted Genesis 1:27. Have you not heard? God created them male and female. There is the differentiation. Yeah. And I do want to just acknowledge that there are intersex people. There are people that are born with both female and male characteristics.
That's really rare, is it not?
Well, about 1 in every 3,000 babies are born intersex.
Really?
However, most of those characteristics resolve themselves by the time they're 2 or 3 or 5. Huh. And what's really, really rare is that it goes beyond that. Even though there are some individuals who have had to suffer from that, I know one in particular. But this is an individual that's just sold out to Jesus, loves Jesus, and he is very, very content in saying that I feel like I have more, of the male chromosome, and that this is, who I am, and it's his relationship with Jesus that sustains him. So he's actually got a powerful testimony. But I think that where this comes to play is really in the life of teenagers and young kids. I'm kind of like you. I get torn some of the time, true side, gray side. I guess some of that might be subjective depending on the individual you're dealing with. But on the other, because it's hard to earn influence with people and disrespect how they see their reality. But at the same time, you don't want to lie. You don't want to say that something is not true. Right. And so, again, where I see this really playing out is in the lives of teenagers. I speak for several different student organizations, consult with student ministries at churches. And I really see this, especially in the lives of young teenage girls right now, even more so than boys. And I see it getting younger and younger and younger. And I'm, really more of the opinion that parents should not use their child's desired pronouns. That while you're raising your kid, you need to really work to help your kid embrace reality. You understand they have their perspective, and you do want to give boundaries, and you do want your kids to have the freedom to ask you questions and not feel like they're going to get, barked at, quote unquote. But at the same time, part of setting boundaries is helping them to face the demands of reality. And I don't know about you, but my 12-year-old and 14-year-old do not always want to face the demands of reality. And you probably think about your kids, and your kids probably have not in the past either. And so, for me, especially with teenagers, I would really, really advise against using desired pronouns or desired names. And unfortunately, there's a huge effort to shame people who would answer the way that I'm answering right now. They call it dead naming. When you use somebody's birth name, or you use pronouns that are associated with their biological sex, that's called dead naming. And so that's just a campaign to shame people. But especially with kids, man, we are fighting for reality, and we have to help them to embrace that.
Interesting. I do appreciate your perspective on that. I that's sort of the way I felt, but my gosh, people get really upset, and it's like, I don't know. Dead name someone in order to bring them life, maybe, right? Let's talk about the political a little bit, because it does get over into it, and not just in the way you vote for president or something, but really the way you vote for school board a lot of times, or the way you approach your school board if you're a parent and they're teaching things in the classroom. What do we need to know as we get into the culture, not just on a one-on-one basis, but coming from more of the political side?
I think one of the things we can take a look at what they're experiencing over in the UK right now. And I think that's a big preview of what is coming our way. And I think that the trans activism that we see right now, especially in the UK, and we see that really happening here in the United States as well, or at least starting to take shape, it is much more militant, if you want to use that word, or very forceful, even more so than the LGBTQ activists were back in the 80s and 90s. I would almost say that, it just aligns right with progressive ideology, not even liberal ideology, but progressive. And you could argue, Randy, that, that they are making some of the same mistakes that the moral majority made in the 1980s. They're just repeating history. It's just on the other side of the aisle. Yeah. But that is not stopping them. There's a great book. Can't remember the guy's last name, but he wrote a book called The Madness of the Crowds. And Douglas, I can't remember his last name, but Madness of the Crowds. It's so good. And he's a British commentator, really good with sociology. And he really paints this great image of LGBTQ rights, where you have people and they're on a train, and the train has arrived at the train station. You've gotten to where you want to go, and yet everybody says, we're not there yet. Keep going, keep going. And the train conductor says, hey, there's a wall right in front of you. Douglas Murray is his name.
Is it Douglas Murray?
He says, there's a wall right in front of you. And they're like, no, keep going, keep going. And the train lurches forward and hits the wall and just explodes. And I think that's kind of what we're eventually going to see. There was a Time magazine article that covered a GLAAD survey back in the end of summer 2019 or the beginning of fall 2019. And this survey that GLAAD did showed that more young adults and Gen Z are less affirming of LGBTQ individuals than millennials. Now, that might surprise some people. And I don't know if it's necessarily the fact that they are less affirming, but what I think it is, Randy, I think that they are actually tired of the extremism. And I think even out here in California, I see a lot of that. Where even in one of my son's classes a few years ago, his teacher had him the class get in a circle, and everybody on the first day of class went around and said what gender they wanted to be. Why?
Jeez.
Why? And so I do think that there's a sense in which people are going to start reacting towards the extremism. And I think you see that more and more every day.
Yeah. It's Douglas Murray, The Madness of Crowds, if anyone is interested. Let me ask you this, though, because we could spend another half hour talking about the politics side of it. But my gut feeling, really my spiritual conviction, is that we should stand against this agenda, the transgender, LGBTQ plus whatever agenda, because it hurts people. Caleb, you grew up in that environment. You grew up at the gay pride parades. You grew up being taught that Christians hated you, and some arguably did. Does it hurt people?
Yeah, I think that, obviously, I have a lot of LGBTQ friends who are even nicer than Christians. So I just want to point that out. And I'm sure you do too, Randy, but I'm just like, I know non-Christians that are nicer than Christians,
Sure.
to be honest. And I know Christians vice versa, who are nicer than other Christians. But the fact of the matter is that, I believe in that God designed sex to be expressed in a marriage between one man and one woman. And you see that flowing. So I think that that's God's plan. I think that's what we need to unite around. But as far as the political side is what it harms, I think that the agenda of the extremists or the far left or the LGBTQ activists, which I also want to say most LGBTQ individuals are not LGBTQ activists. Most have never been to a parade. They've never been to a bar, or club, that kind of thing. But you do have activists out there, and there is an agenda, and we see that agenda in things like the Equality Act, where, are there good things in the Equality Act? Yeah, there are a couple good things. Like, I don't think that LGBTQ people should be excluded from jury service. If I have to sit in jury service, they should too. If I have to sit in an LA County court, they should as well. I don't understand why being LGBTQ should prevent you from getting a home loan anywhere or a credit card. I don't see that anywhere in civil society.
Right.
But what you do see there is you do see an active attack against Christianity, against specifically historical Christianity, conservative theological Christianity. And you see that in this is a step that unfortunately will limit what Christian colleges, seminaries, ministries, and churches can do.
Yeah.
And it will put them further out of step with religious freedom. And the more that religious freedom erodes in our society, the worse society gets. I believe in religious freedom, even though I do think that religious freedom can and does make some people more kind of nominal in their faith. It's like, well, I have the freedom to go to soccer practice or go to church. And church is just one thing I do. But at the same time, I overwhelmingly support religious freedom in our country because, number one, it helps us tell more people about Jesus. But number two, religious freedom makes society better for everyone, period. It does. And that this activism is a huge threat to that. And our society, which again, Paul tells us that this will happen, is eroding. And this is part of that. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand up and say what's right, but we shouldn't be surprised as well.
All right. I won't go down that eschatological, theological path with you, other than to say that I view it as a future with great hope. But let me
I do too.
couple of
I
quick
do too.
questions. No, sure. Couple of quick questions, though. Is the confusion, gender confusion, and all the stuff going on with it, is it? You mentioned the rare cases where it is physiological. Okay, I get that. But for the majority, is it psychological or spiritual or both?
I think, well, number one, I think that it's hard and difficult to divorce the spiritual world from the physical world. So I think there's a spiritual side between everything that we experience, every decision we make or action we take. So you can't divorce one from the other.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a sense in which it's spiritual. I think there's a sense in which it is possibly mental and health. I mean, gender dysphoria used to be called gender identity disorder. It is still in the DSM. Like my wife is a Christian counselor. She's a therapist.
What's DSM?
It's still, the DSM is basically like the big Bible version of disorders that psychologists and counselors have, where they use it. You know, you have everything in there, from ADHD to overeating to everything. And so it's still in there. Gender dysphoria is listed as a disorder, even though I think that a lot of people want to take gender dysphoria out of the DSM,
Right.
and so that they view it not as a disorder. I think that one of the reasons why it's kept in there, and again, I could be wrong, is because there's, you know, they want insurance companies to cover the surgery. Surgeries are done and hormones that people take and that kind of thing. So if it's taken out of the DSM, I don't think insurance companies will cover that. But as long as it stays in there, I think insurance companies will. And it's super, super regretful and difficult to think about that, because basically, even when you read the description, gender dysphoria is seen as a disorder when people have experienced like bullying and that kind of thing.
Right.
It gives more of a description of that in there. But the fact of the matter is that keeping it in there, if this is true for pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, it is nothing short of a pyramid scheme almost. It's really sad, because you see the suicidality of LGBTQ youth, and that is beyond heartbreaking, that we need to pray about and do whatever we can to help LGBTQ students. But at the same time, the suicidality of people who have gone through some kind of medically assisted sex change or hormone therapy or that kind of thing is still skyrocketing. And then we never hear about the amount of people that want to detransition, that want to transition back. And in some cases they can't.
Yeah.
And in other cases, it's just so bad because they lose their new friends that they've made. And you talk about feeling alone. Yeah. And in many cases, I was talking to somebody the other day about it. Their child is transitioning back. And they said, Caleb, this is more difficult for us than when she transitioned, first. Yeah. And these are doing unspoken harm to our family, this agenda. Yeah. And really, it's, I think in so many ways it's blood money. And it keeps pharmaceutical companies, the medical industrial complex, very, very wealthy.
Oh, man, there's just so much with this issue. Last question for you, and I just want to know, you mentioned you have friends. Obviously, you're doing ministry. You're gonna know people. How much do some of them hate you, and how does that express itself?
I got more hate when I wrote Messy Grace. I get less hate now. I most of the hate that I get is on social media. I did get one death threat about 1.5 years ago where somebody said they were going to go to the church I was shooting at and shoot me.
You're speaking at.
So I notified the police, and thankfully I wasn't preaching at that church anymore. So.
Did you warn the new pastor, I hope?
Yeah, I shot him a text, say, hey, heads up. But I mean, they never showed up. And I took the letter to the police, and they found the individual, and it was somebody who was insane, and you can never tell the difference. So
Right.
I do get some hate, and I think that but not that much. But I think in the coming months and years, we're going to see that increased, where people just will get to a point where they won't allow disagreement.
Yeah.
Well, they'll say, you can't disagree with me and treat me like a real human being. And that's just sad. And there's a fantastic book out. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And by Carl Trueman, Trueman. And it is just fantastic because he traces how we've gotten to a point where we've accepted kind of, or not we, I shouldn't say we as a society, but there's an elite or a self-perceived elite in society that have accepted the fact that, a man can be called a woman. And he actually starts his book that way, saying that he wanted to investigate it. And he goes back, talks about Marx and Nietzsche and throughout history, and it's so good. And that, because I do think that we're going to get to the point where there is more hate. But like you, I really, even though I do know that Jesus will be coming back, Paul says in the world things will get worse, I do believe that there is hope. Not only in the new heavens and the new earth and in the coming kingdom, but I do believe there is hope and that we can affect change right now. Otherwise, why would God hold us responsible for our decisions?
Yeah, and I appreciate you, Caleb, speaking on the issue and offering practical help, because this is a very tough topic. And it's funny here. I don't know how we got on this topic, but Judy's saying, how about doing a show on the coming rapture? And that's where we have this is where we depart. This is where Judy, a lot of people, a lot of my friends, this is where we depart theologically. I go into that in my book, The Age of Promise. And so if you're interested where I currently stand on future stuff, I recommend The Age of Promise. In fact, if you make a donation to Water for Life, there's a form where you can request some books. We were giving away the book with any donation towards Water for Life, and so this is a nice time to plug that. You can always go to lifetoday.org/live, and I think in the notes, if you just say, "Hey, I want Randy's book, The Age of Promise," we'll send it to you. I mean, not a big deal, but that's a whole other topic. Right now, we need to focus on loving people and bringing people to Christ. And I think if you just keep it that simple, you'll be okay. And if you pick up Caleb's book, Messy Grace, the older book, wonderful. Messy Truth, the new one, it'll be a real great guide on how we can do just that. Let's focus on the simple things. Love people, love Jesus. I don't know. We could stick with those 2 commandments, I think would be all right. And he'll walk us through the individual, how you deal with people on a one-on-one basis if we focus on loving God with our hearts and loving our near one as ourselves. So, Caleb, anything you want to add before I let you go? I appreciate your time and your insight. Really do.
Well, I just want to echo what you said, and I think really you're repeating, what Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, love your neighbor as yourself. But I think you're also repeating what the Apostle Paul said in the book of Galatians, but in more detail in Romans 13, 8 through 10, when he basically says that loving your neighbor fulfills the Old Testament law. Right. A lot of people ask me, why doesn't he say loving God and loving your neighbor? And I think it's, if Paul were here, I think he would say, well, how do you think you love God with everything you are? You love God, by loving your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. And so I do just want to echo what you said. The more complex we make it in how we love people, the worse it's going to be for us to love people. Yep.
That is so good, man. I appreciate you. Your website is calebkaltenbach.com. Is that right? I can't read it from here.
Yeah, calebkaltenbach.com. messygracegroup.org is another one.
That looks just like that, so you can check it out. And Kaltenbach spelled with a K, by the way. Caleb with a C, Kaltenbach with a K. And you can see it on the cover of the book as well. But check all that out. You can actually learn how to reach people that I know some of you think are unreachable, but they're not. God loves them. We love them. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Hit share, hit subscribe or follow if you haven't. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.